Welcome to today's episode of Financial Fluency. Today I have Joan Sotkin, who is the award-winning author of Build Your Money Muscles and the host of The Prosperity Show. Joan, thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this.
So Joan, I've been reading your book and finding out more about you in preparation for today, and you have a very long and interesting history of working with people on their money stuff and your own stuff as well. Can you share with us a little bit of how you got to this place in your life?
Sure. And the reason I do the money stuff is because it was such a problem for me. I had two millionaire brothers and I couldn't rub two pennies together. And I always asked why. Why were they doing what they were doing? And I was keeping myself in this poor me, always having to be rescued position. And I was sick physically and emotionally. I mean, I was a mess. And then in 1975, I realized that I really had no idea what life was about. I didn't want to become a wife with kids like I was supposed to become. That didn't appeal to me. I had already been married twice and it was just too much laundry. I really don't like being married. So I wound up giving everything I owned away and just wandering for a number of years. I was not as healthy as I am now, emotionally or physically. So it was a struggle, but it was wonderful because learning how to trust that everything I needed would come to me. If I had no food or a place to stay, then I figured I was fasting and I'd sleep on the beach. So I just learned how to be okay with whatever was going on, which was very important.
Wow.
And then when I came out of that, and so I became very intuitive. And one day I got this message, go buy a pound of tumbled stones. I had no idea what that meant. And I wound up buying that pound of tumbled stones and building it into a business where I was grossing, in today's money, $50,000 a month. And I had no idea how to manage the cash flow. So I just kept buying more crystals. It was really great. But I wound up going bankrupt. And that's when I realized that even though I had been going to Debtors Anonymous and learning, I was keeping good records and everything, but I didn't know how to manage cash flow. And so that has become very much a part of what I do. And along the way, I learned that money problems like weight problems and a lot of other things have an emotional base. Mm-hmm. So I've become fascinated by the whole emotional connection between money and the emotions we develop early in childhood. Mm-hmm. And I really see now that our financial outcomes are very much dependent on the decisions we make, and every decision has an emotional component. And so the question is, once you recognize this, how do you change it? And so I'm getting very into rewiring the brain, and I've come up with a lot of techniques for doing this, and this is what I do now.
That's so interesting. I just have one question about the tumbled stone business.
Yes.
How did that work? Were you?
Okay, it was called Joan's Crystals.
Okay.
And I had a showroom. It was a mail order business. When I was really sick, I figured I'd never get out of my house, so I studied mail order. And I started, and there was no internet. And computers were very new. Although as soon as the Mac came out, I got myself a Mac. That's one of those little classic Macs. We had
one of those when I was a kid.
PageMaker saved me. And so I learned how to make the catalog and everything. So I had a showroom. I had the retail showroom, the mail order business, and then I put together this line of stones called Joan Stones that wound up in 600 stores. I had psychic stones, serenity stones, prosperity stones, and I created a rack and I packed them, and it was all very primitive, but it worked. And we sold over 50,000 stones. I had a medicine bag with 12 little stones in it and came with instructions. Actually, all the stones came with meditation instructions. And that was my goal, was to teach people meditation and how to get inside, because I was on this spiritual path. So it was a spiritual exercise for me. So, and I had a distributor who got the stones into all the New Age bookstores, and it was quite exciting.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So I was doing what people want to do, but I learned that you have to learn how to manage the money. And it's not just keeping track of the money or having a bookkeeper keep the money. I had a bookkeeper 3 days a week, but he would just do what I told him to do. And I just kept buying more crystals. Had a lot of crystals, but I wasn't managing the cash flow right. And when my father died and I went into this emotional tailspin, I just started buying and buying and buying. And it was easier to experience a loss of my business than a loss of my father. I mean, that's where the emotional piece comes in. So, it was quite a ride.
And I agree. If there weren't the emotional component, anyone could just read a book and follow instructions and do that thing, kind of like a diet book. And yet all of us have this way of interacting with food and with value. And yeah. So after you experienced the loss of your business and your father, how did that bring you into focusing on helping other people with money?
Well, first of all, I wound up giving everything I owned away.
Oh, okay. And then you went on the wander.
Because for me, when I have to find out, I just go inside. Anyhow, I wound up, at some point, I woke up one day and I heard, you're moving to New Mexico. And I thought, why would I want to be in New Mexico? I had been here once in Santa Fe and was sick from the altitude the entire time and had no desire to get back here, but I knew to trust that voice by now because of this journey I had been on. So in 1996, I packed my car. I came here with $200 and whatever fit in my car. By this time, I had gotten online. In August of 1995, I got online. Now, I had been in the mail order business. And all the people who were direct marketers were gathering online because this was the mail order business. And we were trying to figure out how to use it and that sort of thing. And so within 2 months, I built a website for myself. Now, remember, there was no internet. No, this was the internet. That's what I found. I found the internet. So I figured out how to create a website. There was no software. I had to figure out how to do it. And within 2 months, I had a website. And there were no shopping carts. There was just, you had a form people would have to fill out and mail in with their check. This is a whole different ballgame. And as soon as I had enough money to get to Santa Fe, and $200 was enough for me, I came here. And by this time, I had built a site for a couple of other people. And so I not only had my website, which became Prosperity Place, but I was also building websites for people.
That's a good use of that skill once you have it, especially back then.
Yes. And there are people who are still in business online, and I got them started with these very simple HTML sites, and I just fell in love with the internet. It was mail order, and you didn't have to pay for postage. At one year, I paid $30,000 in postage. So when I saw you didn't have to pay postage, that to me was, wow, this is really fabulous.
So what were you selling through that site?
Well, the first site was called Resources for Living, until I found out that I was stepping on someone's trademark. Okay. So I was selling whatever crystals I had left, and I was selling some booklets I had written, and it was mostly the crystals. And then I started selling, before people were calling themselves coaches, I said what I was doing was giving freelance advice. So I continued to give freelance advice. And, I kind of, because of the journey I had been on, I can kind of just listen to that creative inspiration, and being an action-oriented person, I'll put, I'm not afraid of making mistakes. So I'll put what I'm learning, what I'm hearing I'll try it and see what happens. Because I realize whatever's happening, if it doesn't work, at least I learned something from it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's often good in the moment to share what you're learning with other people.
I love to do that. I love to do that. And that's really what I do now on my podcast and on my site. On my podcast, every other episode, I just talk for 20 minutes. I love to talk. Mm-hmm. And I'm sharing my process. Mm-hmm. It's like now I'm doing online courses. And so I started with Udemy, and then I'm moving to Thinkific. And so I share what the reality is. I try not to sugarcoat things, because mm-hmm. people have a very strange idea about how easy it is to make money, mm-hmm. or how the few things you have to do to get a business started. And so I like to give them a realistic idea of what it takes to build a business, to do online courses, to do a podcast, whatever they're wanting to do. And I have a big background in radio and television production, so I can help people know how to do the lighting and how to make a backdrop and how to ask questions. So, I just try to take everything I've learned and help other people learn it too.
Mm-hmm. So the period of time when you were doing television and radio, was that after the crystal business or alongside it?
No. In 1964-ish, I was producing one of the original radio talk shows in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And my job was to get the guests, and I came up with a reference system. So if he said something, I'd give him the facts. And when that stopped, I wound up working for Joey Bishop. There was a late night show opposite Johnny Carson called The Joey Bishop Show. And it's very interesting because my job was to book the guests and write the show notes.
That gives you experience for podcasting.
Right, write the show notes with the questions that he would ask. Uh-huh. So, and when I was doing the radio show, when we had guests like people who were into UFOs and the woo-woo stuff, the host didn't like to do that. So he would let me do the interviews. Oh, so he helped me get rid of my Brooklyn accent, and I had to stop saying talk in the office. and along the way, I've just been involved in a lot of production kind of stuff. And at one point, there was a guy who was the president of a university, and they wanted him to run for governor. So they called me in to get him straightened out so he wasn't picking his nails on camera. Like that. So I've had a variety of experiences. So doing what I'm doing now is just so normal to me. The podcast is perfectly normal. The first podcast I did was in 2005 to 2007. I stopped the month the iPhone came out. Not great timing, but so I love to talk, and so I want to make my living talking. I want to do my marketing talking. Mm-hmm. And it really works for me because I like to share what I know.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of courses are you working on right now?
Okay, so the two I have up right now are Financial Freedom Formula, a holistic blueprint for success, and Simple Meditation for Busy Entrepreneurs. And the one I'm working on now, which should be done by the middle of September, is the next part of the Financial Freedom Formula, and it's about rewiring your brain for prosperity.
Can you talk to us some about that? That sounds really interesting.
Sure. Sure. Okay, so what I've come to understand is that everything about us is a habit. How we think, what we feel. We start our emotional habits very early in life as we respond to the world around us. Our beliefs are a habit. Our behaviors are a habit. So if you want to move yourself into a new financial position, which is a reflection of you, so it's a combination of your thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and behaviors, then you have to say, okay, what's not working and what do I have to change?
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that you have this thing called the amygdala, which is in your brain, whose job it is to protect you. And as soon as you start making changes, it tells you you're in danger. So the fear comes up and you get really confused. So you go back to doing what you were doing, which is the resistance. I've always wondered, why do people who know what they're supposed to be doing don't do it? Because it works.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm trying to help people understand is how to change their thoughts, how to change their beliefs, how to alter their emotions, because it's your emotions that inform your decisions that are behind your behaviors. So you have to be able to make a different kind of decision. And every decision has an emotional component, which is why I particularly like to look at emotions.
Mm-hmm. You know, I feel like there's been a lot of books and research in that area lately. You know, there's that book, The Power of Habit. Yeah, yeah.
It's wonderful. And, all of a sudden, I'm not the only one saying this. I've been talking like this for 30 years. Okay. And what fascinates me is the fact that only 2% of the people who say they're going to change actually change. So, and I really believe it's because they haven't dealt with the emotions. And now we have all this information about emotional intelligence and the fact that people are saying out loud, you have to deal with the emotions. And I've gone deeper into the emotional body than most people because I've been doing it for 30 years. Some of the people who are teaching it haven't even been alive for 30 years. And so I'm extremely intuitive. So when I'm working with a person and they tell me what, they fill out a questionnaire and I can see from what they've said, what the main feelings are that they're acting out through their money. And I can usually tell what the family of origin issues were. So it goes very quickly because it's not like therapy where you have to sit and tell the story over and over again. I don't think you have to do that. I think you have to be able to recognize what you're doing, decide if you want to change it, and have a plan for changing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it helps to have a coach who's, making you accountable for what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. That figure, 2% of people who say they're going to change. I'm curious where that comes from. Just thinking about all the 12-step programs and all these different things that people do to try to change.
Anyone I've talked to who is in the personal growth and development business, knows that a very small portion of the people will actually make a change. And I've figured out why. Okay, here's why. Whoever you are today is who you believe you are. It's your identity. So if you say, well, I'm a person with a low self-image, that's part of your identity. If you come from a family where there is any kind of abuse or neglect or alcoholism or a lack of bonding, well,
which is a lot of us.
Let's imagine that there's a lack of bonding. Well, the feeling that's going to start at that point when you're a tiny little baby is a feeling of longing. And that longing becomes so much a part of who you are that you don't even realize it's there. And so you start acting out parts of your life with that longing, because there's always a multitude of feelings. But under-earning and what I call over-earning are both expressions of longing. Oh, I need more money. I need more money. Or even though I have $1 billion, I need more. That's all longing, okay? So getting rid of that longing means that you're threatening your identity. And within that identity is your relationship with your family of origin, my position in the family of origin. I was the identified patient. I was the one who was one down all the time. And you have a position in your peer group, so that most of the people in your peer group are either in your same economic situation, or they're all above you or below you, but you have a position in your peer group. And our instinctive fear of being alone is so strong that when we start changing our position, it's a threat to our identity, as well as our position in our peer group and our position in the family of origin. So no wonder only 2% of the people make the change, because as soon as you start changing, people in your peer group and family of origin will start pushing it back at you, and they start teasing you, and it's like when people lose weight and the people in your family aren't supporting your weight loss because they like it the way it is. They haven't signed up for change. So it's the process of change that's the problem, not creating new financial habits. And so the amygdala is saying, you're walking into the unknown, danger, danger. So that's why people don't make the change. And also, once you start changing, you get what I call the moving stupids. Now, the reason I call it that, it's because when you move into a new house, you go from where you've been to where you want to be there, but you get really stupid. You don't know where anything is. You lose your wallet, you lose your keys, because you haven't got the neural pathways for the routines for the new house. So people will even drive to the old house because they're so used to going that way, right?
Yeah.
So it's a matter of understanding that as you're making changes, you've got all the neural pathways from the old way of living, and you're developing new neural pathways. Now, the brain can clear out the old ones, but the new ones have to get strong enough. So there's this period where the two kinds of pathways are in conflict, so to speak, the old ones and the new ones. So you're in this place of disorientation as you're deciding which pathway in your brain to take. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. So what kind of steps do you take to help people do that?
Okay, so first of all, you have to recognize what's going on. You have to understand that you're in the moving stupids. When I work with people in groups, they'll all say, "Oh, I think I'm in the moving stupids." Yeah. And once you understand that you're there, you have to be okay with the discomfort. And that's what gets to most people, because you have to be willing to go through that, what I call the tunnel of transition, where it's dark in the tunnel, you have no idea how long it is, and you have no idea what really lies at the end of the tunnel. So as you're going through this tunnel, you have to keep making decisions as to which direction you're going to move in. And you have to understand that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not really disoriented. It's just your brain giving you these funny messages. And that's why it helps to have a prosperity buddy who's going through the same process that you are, or a coach or someone who can assure you that you're walking in the right direction.
Okay. That makes sense.
It will pass. You have to remember when you were learning to drive, and it was really uncomfortable for the first month or two, and then suddenly it was automatic, because that's when the new neural pathways have taken over, and it's a new habit. And same thing with your emotions. If you say, "Well, I just don't feel, I'm just not enough." Well, that's a feeling. It's not a condition. And so you have to recognize the feeling. Then there are techniques that I teach for releasing the feeling, and then saying, what would I rather feel? And do I know how to feel that? Because if I don't know how to feel that new feeling, I have to practice. Today I was talking to someone who actually had married into quite a bit of money, and she's very uncomfortable with her situation. And she has no idea how to feel wealthy. She's schlepping along those old feelings of not enough and less than. And so she actually has to practice feeling wealthy. Because you can have lots of money. People who have billions of dollars and need more very possibly don't feel wealthy because they're trying to get to that point of enough. And a lot of people feel not enough. So I say, well, do you know how to feel enough? What does enough mean? Do you have enough teaspoons? Do you have enough underwear?
There's toilet paper.
Do you have enough toilet paper? Do you have enough
That
food?
makes me feel very unwealthy not having enough toilet paper in the house.
Okay, so you recognize the feeling, okay?
Yeah.
I know, yeah, I gotta go. I just did that yesterday. Go get more toilet paper.
Keep it stocked up.
Yeah. And actually, toilet paper is a good idea because that helps you understand the moving stupids. If you have it going in one direction and you suddenly change the direction of the toilet paper, it's really uncomfortable.
It can annoy you. Yeah.
And that's the moving
switched
stupids.
around if someone puts it in the other way.
And that's the moving stupids. And that's the desire to go back to where you are. So in my book, I teach people how to adapt to change, how to take a new route to work, how to put your dishes differently in the cabinets, how to turn the toilet paper around, how to do things that stimulate, that have no consequence, but that stimulate the moving stupids so you can learn how to deal with them.
You know, I've heard of doing things like that in some of these books I was talking about, like The Power of Habit and stuff like that, that it does help to stimulate your brain for learning and growing and keeping off Alzheimer's, all those sorts of things. They say drive a different route, you know, take up a new hobby, do these different things.
New neural pathways.
Yeah.
The secret is rewiring your brain and keeping that process going. You know, not to let your brain get stagnant. That's what luminosity and all these things are about, keeping your brain exercised. I mean, it's really important. I think it's also important to eat right. I have not had sugar since August 11th, 1973.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Which is why I can be where I am today and be healthy. I wasn't a very healthy person. On a cellular level, I'm really healthy now. And so I think you need to get enough sleep, eat right, meditate every day, you know, to do the things that they're telling you to do, and you just haven't got time to do it. The trick is, if you do it, you're going to have much more time to live. That's
a good way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, you do have time. This concept that you don't have enough time, infinite amount of time. You're just afraid of dying. So you think you have a limited amount of time on the planet. And you do. But that doesn't mean that you should be in a hurry to get from point A to point B, because, you know,
point B
at
is
some
death.
point,
Why rush towards death, right?
Exactly. You know, and
Take
at my
your
age,
time.
you don't, in my age, you don't write. There was a line on the Golden Girls once, I don't even buy green bananas, you know. One of the old people said that. And you just don't know, you know. And this is why I think it's so important to meditate, because it teaches you to focus on the moment, not the future.
And a lot of financial focus does end up being on this future, the retirement future. I have 2 special needs kids. So when we realized, especially my oldest, is going to need a lot of support through the rest of her life, you know, it kind of moved the goalpost for me for my retirement goal out from the end of my life to the end of her life. Right. And, you know, that really changed a lot of focus on a lot of things, but it also does have those goals being so far off, you know?
Right. But the trick is to not let fear get in the way. To know that if you walk with one foot in front of the other and you stay focused on what you're doing in the moment, that you will get to where you have to go.
Well, and on the other hand,
and, you know, you're in the financial business. With everything that's going on in the world today, with all the chaos that we're experiencing, and I read a lot of financial news, and there's an awful lot of people who aren't sure what's happening in the financial world. It's very volatile right now. And it's so easy to make decisions based on fear. whenever fear makes you stupid. I had a friend of mine who's a neuroscientist, and she said, fear makes you stupid. And it really does, because you're coming from this reptilian brain instead of your executive function in the frontal lobes. And you really have to have a certain amount of trust to know that whatever's happening, if we have another financial downturn, it's just going to make everybody afraid again, and fear doesn't solve any problems. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had to learn how to be not afraid when I was homeless, when I never knew where the food was coming from or where I was going to be sleeping. So I somehow learned how to override that fear message. And you can do that.
That's so interesting, because that is exactly what so many people fear, is what you consciously put yourself in this situation that is the thing most people fear: losing their job, losing their home, not knowing where the food is coming from.
And if I had no food, I figured I was learning how to fast. It depends upon how you look at it. Mm-hmm. It's our mental state is so important to our outcomes. There are no right or wrong answers. There are no good happenings and bad happenings. Losing money is not bad. It's just uncomfortable. And you have to say, okay, what does it take to accept where I am and take action to move someplace else? When you're in fear, it's hard to take action. Mm-hmm. So for me, it means, the meditation I do when I gave everything away, I was meditating 6 to 8 hours a day, but you don't have to do that anymore because the energy of the world has changed. And, if you meditate 10 to 15 minutes a day, it's plenty. And you can get your instructions from that no fear space. And because we all have different answers. People are looking to our political leaders for answers. I'm not going to mention names.
Okay.
And the answers are within you. And until you take responsibility for your emotions, for your decisions, and you realize that life is not happening to you, it's happening through you. And the more aware you become of your internal environment while you're learning financial skills, the better you're going to be able to, handle the ups and downs of the markets, which are going to remain volatile for a long time. Mm-hmm. I mean, the banks haven't changed their behavior, and I mean, I can give you a long list of reasons why we're not in a stable financial place. And I think it's important to pay attention to financial news, but if you get to the point where you're not allowing the fear to come in, you're getting facts. Because people read the financial news, or they avoid the financial news. They don't keep track of their money because they don't want to know the truth. It makes them feel awful. Well, once you realize you're just after facts, and mm-hmm. there is no good or bad. There only is what is. And your job is to decide how you're going to deal with what is. I'm getting over. I just had it taken off. I had a cast from here to here for 6 weeks. I had surgery on my fingers. Well, I had to adapt. I had to not complain. I had to learn how to ask for help because I couldn't make my bed myself and I couldn't take out the garbage myself. So I had to learn certain things. But I didn't see that what was happening to me was bad. People will say, oh, I had this awful thing happen to me. It's not awful. It's just what happened to you. Life happens. There's no such thing as a flat line on the higher end. It's just like stocks. You never see, whoops, it goes like this. Right? Or mm-hmm. like this. And it's not good or bad. It's just what it is. And so one of the things I think you have to train yourself to do is to say, okay, whatever is fine or not, but I can deal with it. It may be uncomfortable. What do I have to do to make myself more comfortable? And the thing that you have to do usually is adjust what's going on inside.
So if someone comes to you with a lot of fear about their financial situation, what do you do with them first? How do you help them?
I help them understand what the fear is really about.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if someone thinks they need more money, what they really need is more people, because money always comes from people. So instead of focusing, oh, if I only had more money, and if they're going, if I only had more money, that's longing.
Mm-hmm.
So I help them understand that it's never about money and what they're really saying to themselves. And to understand, to help them believe that worrying is a waste of time. It doesn't solve anything. Concern is okay because then it pushes you to action. But to help them understand that their fear is not solving any problems. And it takes training to get over the fear because your brain is wired for fear. So you have to understand that it's just a habitual response.
Mm-hmm.
And some people stay in fear as a way of protecting themselves so that they don't have to take a chance and make a decision to take action. I mean, it's a complex thing. So I usually, have to ask a few questions and find out what is causing that particular person's fear. Very often it's because something awful happened to their parents and they're afraid it's going to happen to them. There's any one of a number of reasons. When in the situation you're in, there's plenty of opportunity for fear.
Mm-hmm.
And not knowing how to handle the situation and what's it going to be in the future. And to me, the answer is to bring your consciousness, your thought processes back to the moment. What's going on today? Am I dealing with it today? And if I'm dealing with it today, then I can probably deal with it tomorrow. I mean, you have to do that. These are all mind tricks because we can't control what's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm. Especially not the far future.
Right. And our political leaders, we can vote. We can do that.
Right. We can take some action. But
yes. And whatever that action means to you. And I realize that some people are more action oriented as I am, and other people are not. So you have to say, what action do I have to take? And do I need help taking that action?
Mm-hmm.
I have a client who finally got a prosperity buddy, and he said it's making a really big difference to go through the process with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And he's an action-oriented guy, but it took him almost 3 months to do it.
Well, I think a lot of us feel really isolated and alone when we do have financial issues come up. I mean, it's something.
Okay, so let me say something.
Okay.
The financial issues don't come. The feeling alone doesn't come from the financial issues. The financial issues come from feeling alone. Because aloneness is one of the main feelings that are acted out through money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If you had any kind of abuse or neglect or alcoholism or any of that stuff in the family, as a little kid, you felt alone.
Well, I think that covers a wide range of
huge. The feeling of aloneness is so prevalent. We make a lot of stupid decisions to feel more connected. That lack of touch is the feeling of not being connected. And one of our core needs as human beings is to feel connected. So when you're feeling alone with your problem, the answer is not to get more money, it's to get more people. But so many people are afraid of being rejected, or no one's going to like them, or they're going to think they're stupid, or whatever it is, and so they don't reach out. Yes, that's why I like the 12-step programs as a place for people to start.
Mm-hmm.
Place you can go and say anything you want, and people actually clap and they, oh, that's very good, very good.
And say, me too, I have that problem as well.
Yeah, exactly. Or to become part of either a Facebook group if you're really afraid of showing who you are, and to bring people into your life. That's why I love the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I live in a relatively small town. Santa Fe only has like 70,000 people in the town, and there aren't.
I'm even smaller. I'm Flagstaff, Arizona. So.
Okay, you're nearby, and it's not. And so with the internet, that's why I have a podcast. I can meet people like you.
Mm-hmm,
And
exactly.
there are many people I stay in touch with and I do joint ventures with. And you can be so afraid of people seeing you or knowing you that you don't take the action. So one of the things you have to understand is that there are no mistakes, and that everybody who's in the drama has to be there for some reason. It's that's why there's so many skills involved, which is why only 2% of the people make the permanent change.
So what do you think about when people have something drastic happen in their life and then make that permanent change? Because you hear about those stories a lot, like someone has a heart attack and then quits their job and does their
Absolutely.
dream, those big moments.
I think everyone needs a life. I call that a life death,
Yeah.
And everybody needs a life death. Everybody needs a life death. I had one of my own. I was within a half hour of dying, and it just does something to you. So it's kind of the quick fix, but
if it doesn't kill you, right?
You had to find a quick fix when you had your kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, that's why I've started doing all of this stuff, was because our finances got so complex, and I really, really struggled. This was before Obamacare. 2010 was when my oldest was diagnosed, and I got so overwhelmed that I started looking for things that would help. I started, trying to do automated systems and set things up so I wouldn't forget, because I hardly get any sleep with my kids. We have sleep disorders going on. My oldest is tube fed. She can't process protein. We have all these things going on, and I needed help.
You had no choice. You had no choice.
Yeah. But I do find that having groups I have a group around my podcast. I have a membership group too. And what I love about those groups is finding these other women where we can talk about things and not feel alone with all of the stuff that we're dealing with.
That's it. People are the solution to feeling financial fear.
I've never heard it stated quite that way, and I love that. You're right. I really needed more people. I did feel very isolated both geographically and with the issues with my kids, and then feeling all of this pressure with the finances, for all of these expensive medical things. And
right,
I needed some people to talk to.
If you look at what money is, money by itself has no power at all. It's just coins or pieces of paper or numbers on a spreadsheet. It's when it passes between two people or entities that it gets its power.
Mm-hmm.
And so money is actually a symbol of relationships. And how you deal with your money is similar to how you deal with your relationships with yourself and others. So if you see it in terms of relationships, that's very different from, I have to make more money. No, I have to have more relationships, because that's where the money comes.
Well, I'm interested because you brought up a few times people who've had abuse in childhood or neglect or those sorts of things. That actually has come up a lot on this show. We had one show that was about the red flags for financial abuse with a woman who is a domestic violence advocate because she experienced it herself. And how does that work into your work that you do with people?
There is now a book called Childhood Disrupted, How Your Biography Affects Your Biology. And it talks about how there's a test that anyone can take online, the ACE test, and there are 10 questions. And if you score on any of those questions or more, it's very true that your background is affecting your life outcomes, because it affects your emotional habits that are the creative force behind your decisions, okay? And the more you understand these emotions that you developed, these habitual emotions that you developed as a child because of what was going on around you, that those emotions are still with you today, and they're seeking an avenue of expression. And so you create life stories that enable you to feel the feelings, but if you don't express them, they're going to keep on doing that over and over again, because emotions by their nature need to be expressed.
So for those of us in those categories, I'm just going to put myself in there. I experienced child abuse.
Yes.
And we can do, a lot of us have done a lot of therapy. A lot of us have, tried different avenues. How do you get past it? I mean, how do you know when you dealt with it?
One little step at a time. I had emotional abuse, and I had touch deprivation. My father, who had quite a good sense of humor, I didn't think this was funny as I understood it. He used to say she drooled on me when she was 6 months old, and I never touched her again. And it was pretty true, and he really meant well for me, but he was nuts. He had a terrible background. He had an alcoholic father, and difficult childhoods lead to difficult child, and it's generational. And so there's a lot of inner work that has to be done, where you understand that your parents were wounded children, that they didn't, most people, I had one client who said this wasn't true for me, most parents don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to screw up that kid.
Mm-hmm.
They're
I don't think any of us do.
Most
of us want to be very good parents.
They don't. So I'm going to make a guess and say, given your situation, you probably feel trapped. Is that a good guess? The situation with your kids, even though you want to do the best for them and everything else, there's probably a part of you that feels trapped.
There are times and ways that it feels like there aren't a lot of options. So my goal is always to try to create more options. But yeah, I guess I suppose so.
Let's call it trapped. Let's just call it trapped.
Okay.
When you were a kid, you also felt trapped.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a feeling you developed as a child.
Yeah.
Now you're dealing with it much better now, because you're not recognizing that you feel trapped all the time.
Yeah.
Although you might, and when you started having financial problems, you probably felt trapped, but you're obviously an action-oriented person, and you took the action to satisfy, to find a solution to feeling trapped, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the piece that a lot of people are missing. They don't find a solution.
Well, I also think a lot of the women that I know in some of these different groups that I'm in who have experienced abuse in childhood really want to break the cycle. I mean, we've all heard about the cycle of abuse. You're talking about wounded parents harming their children. I feel like both with looking at all this neuroscience and habits and all those sorts of things, a lot of us are trying to figure out how to not perpetuate these things and not pass them.
Okay, but you have to understand that the feelings you have that are hard to break are part of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
I was an abused person.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain habits you've developed as a person who was abused.
Okay. Well, I definitely try not to identify that way in most, and this is actually the first time I've said this on the show, but
okay. But it's
great. I try to not have it be part of my identity, but.
Right. But you can't just ignore it.
Yeah.
Because it is part of your identity. And the more you talk about it, the less it will be a part of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're expressing what is true for you, and you won't have to schlep it along with you all forever.
Mm-hmm.
But there are certain attachments you have now with people because you share the abuse experience.
Mm-hmm.
And if you no longer carry those feelings, it's going to separate you from the group. And so your fear of being alone is going to keep you in that identity.
Mm.
That's why only 2% of the people change. Because we're so afraid of actually being alone that we're afraid to change the dynamic of our peer group. And you have to say to yourself, who would I be? How would I behave if I wasn't abused?
Hard to know.
That's the job. That's how you create the new neural pathways, by figuring out how you want to feel and practicing feeling it.
So Joan, we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon because the show's this is a little longer than we usually go, but I'm still struggling with this 2% because I feel like so many people I know have these major life events, these big occurrences. You know, you have deaths in the family, you have accidents, you have people becoming disabled, you become caregivers. You know, I feel like I see people develop so much throughout their life. Like if I go see someone I haven't seen in 20 years.
And they do.
Yeah.
But my experience generally, and I don't want to put everybody in a general category, is that people say they want their lives to change, but they don't want to change. And you can change a lot of things in your life and still be dealing with the same feelings of inadequacy and the same feelings of being trapped and the same feelings of being alone. I'm concerned about a person's internal space. Now, a lot of people change, but they may reach a point and not go further. Very few people make the, permanent big change, not only externally, but internally. The frustration of, I talk to coaches and I talk to a lot of people in this business, and their frustration is how few people actually stick with it.
Yeah, that's true. That is really true.
Although
like people will buy a program and not finish it, or
people will lose weight
and gain it back.
Gain it back again.
Yep.
And that's why I say to coaches, you can't be invested in your client's outcome. That you can only give them the information they need and then let go.
That seems hard because
you're not
as a client, I would want my coach to be really invested in my results.
I'm talking about you can't feel responsible for your client's results. In other words, if your client doesn't do well, that's not your problem. If you've given them information that could work for them, you can't force them to make it work for them. So as a coach, you have to present the information and not be attached to their results. You can't do that, otherwise you'll stay up at night.
But at the same time, you were saying with the methods you're using to try to rewire the brain, you're going for those things that will make the permanent change, right?
Right, and I can tell you exactly how to do it. But if you're not going to finish the course, I can't force you.
Yeah
I can't force feed information. And you've had a look at my book. Lots of, I can't tell you how many people say, I read the first 3 chapters. Then when they get to exercise 3, which is the emotional one, and they said, I heard you on a podcast, so I took it off the shelf and I've started reading it again. People don't finish the course. You just said it. Now, why? Because it's a threat to who they've been.
I have to tell you a quick funny aside before we wrap this up, which is I once bought a course called Finisher's Formula.
Yes.
And I was really curious how many people finished it. And I'm going to admit, I didn't finish it because people who buy this course called Finisher's Formula are self-identified non-finishers. And that's what we struggle with is
there's the identity.
Yeah.
Self-identify as.
Yeah,
so
because we know we've bought courses before and didn't finish them, and we beat ourselves up for not finishing them because life comes in and distracts you.
Now, I buy courses and don't finish them, and I never beat myself up about it.
Well, that's good. Good that you don't beat yourself up about it.
I just get what I need from it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with not finishing it.
Well, actually, after I did that course, it really showed me I needed to stop buying courses. That I have some courses, very good information in them. I need to go and glean what I can from any of those and not keep, it's shiny objects out there.
Absolutely.
And that's why the industry is so big, is because so many people want change, but
they aren't willing to change. They want their lives to change, but they don't want to change.
They wanted enough to buy a course, though.
No, they want it to appear that they really want to change. You have to. This stuff is not easy. It's not easy. You don't want to have to wait for the heart attack. You don't want to have to wait for something like you've gone through. You have to make a decision that I'm willing to go through the discomfort of change.
Mm-hmm. So, Joan, here, as we wrap up, if people are fascinated by what they've heard on this and they want to find out more, they want to reach you, where can they find you? How do they work with you?
Find me at prosperityplace.com.
Okay.
Everything is there. And my courses are at prosperityplace.com/programs.
Okay.
If you go to the program, because it's not always on the site, it's off on another place. So, and if you sign up for the free stuff on my site, then you get on my newsletter and you find out about everything that's coming up. And there's plenty of good free stuff. Okay,
great. We'll put all of that in the show notes so people can click the link and find it. And thank you so much for joining me. This has been a really fascinating conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
So if you are trying to do what they do, they will always beat you at the game, because for them, that is natural. That is their natural energy.